Olá, que alegria estarmos novamente com vocês numa live da Sociedade Bíblica do Brasil. Nós temos hoje aqui conosco um convidado muito especial, é o Dr. Christoph Rösel. Dr. Christoph Rösel é o Secretário-geral, ou CEO da Sociedade Bíblica da Alemanha. Ele é um especialista em Antigo Testamento e, por trabalhar na Sociedade Bíblica da Alemanha, ele é responsável pelas edições acadêmicas que a Sociedade Bíblica da Alemanha faz. As 3 edições mais conhecidas no mundo inteiro são a Bíblia Hebraica Sttutgartensia, o Novo Testamento grego, que o mais conhecido eu acredito seja a versão de Nestle-Aland, e também a Vulgata Latina. Então são textos bíblicos famosos, muito conhecidos, fundamentais para todo o trabalho bíblico. E o trabalho também na Alemanha, que é a terra da Reforma, onde ele também é pastor. Então vamos lá. Dr. Christoph, uma alegria poder estar com o senhor e ter essa live aqui da Sociedade Bíblica do Brasil.
Thank you for inviting me to coming to Brazil, and it's a pleasure to be here and to be here together with you.
Thank you so much. Obrigado, Dr. Rösel. Nós costumamos perguntar às pessoas que vêm aqui para essas lives como a Bíblia entrou na vida delas. O senhor lembra da primeira Bíblia da sua vida?
Oh, that's a difficult question.
Yeah.
I don't know if I really remember the first one.
Yeah.
I know that the Bible came into my life through my family.
Okay.
So my parents read from the Bible, told me stories from the Bible. And I remember having Bible comics. And we still print them at the Bible Society. These are these yellow comics. They are already 50 years old and older. But I remember learning Bible stories through reading these comics. And so this is one of the first things I really remember. But there were other Bibles already earlier. And then there was a Luther Bible and other ones following up.
E a primeira Bíblia da sua vida, quando é que ela chegou, uma Bíblia que você pudesse dizer, esta é minha Bíblia?
So I remember one, which I still have. This was for the confirmation. After finishing the confirmation class, and I was 13 years old at this time. And my parents gave me a Bible which was with gold edges and with leather bound and with a zip. And so I still have it. Yes, this was the first Bible, and I used it later on in seminary. I was using this Bible and writing my notes in there. And when I had it for the first years, I added these small tabs so that you find the biblical books. Mm-hmm. And later on, when I knew the books, I cut them off again. So you still see the signs of how I used this Bible over the years. Yeah.
Era uma Bíblia com índice digital, como nós falamos aqui, que você colocou para achar os livros da Bíblia com mais facilidade. Olha que história bonita. Obrigado por compartilhar. E como é que foi que você resolveu entrar nessa área acadêmica? Como é que foi estudar para teologia, pensar em servir a Deus na igreja? Como é que foi essa passagem?
So this was a process in several steps. Mm-hmm. So I still remember then I was near to finishing school. Mm-hmm. I would say it was a kind of calling. To said I wanted to go to the seminary, and the seminary I went to was from the Pietistic movement in Germany. In fact, it was in Switzerland at the border to Germany, and maybe I was influenced because a brother of my father and a brother of my mother also attended the seminary. So there was some familiar influence and so on. But I never considered at this point attending university and doing the studies at university and so on. I added this later on. Yeah. So after I worked some years as a youth pastor, I realized that maybe one of my gifts is maybe a little bit more in teaching and in research. so I went to university and did my PhD and other postgraduate studies and so on. And later on, I taught Old Testament at a Christian institution and so on. So this is a longer process, developing over the years and step by step. Yeah.
É quase sempre assim. Começa com devagar e depois vai se aprofundando a pessoa na sua vocação.
Yes, yes, yeah. It's same for me. Yeah.
Agora eu queria conversar com você um pouco sobre o processo das publicações acadêmicas da Sociedade Bíblica Alemã. Quais são as publicações acadêmicas que a Sociedade Bíblica Alemã? Nós temos algumas aqui. Eu vou pegar uma por uma e quem sabe você nos conta
the Stuttgartensia.
Yeah. Let's begin with this one. Fala um pouquinho sobre essa aqui, que é a Bíblia Hebraica Sttutgartensia.
So, the concept of this Biblia Hebraica was developed from a German scholar named Rudolf Kittel. And he developed it, I think it was more or less 100 years ago. And then the first edition was printed in Leipzig. And although the second edition was printed there, but then they thought maybe this is not such a successful book. And there are other editions around, and so we no longer want to print it. Maybe this was also connected to the history in Germany. If you remember the Third Reich, Jewish studies were not that popular at this time. But the Bible Society at this time already printed the Greek New Testament. So they bought the copyright for this edition, and then they first printed the third edition of the Kittel Bible, and then they developed it further, and then they started anew. This is the fourth edition then, and then they added their name, Stuttgartensia, for Stuttgart. So that not only Mercedes and Bosch is coming from there, but also the Bible is coming from Stuttgart. And so we had the New Testament, which was developed by Eberhard Nestle. He came, or he lived near Stuttgart. And so he approached the Bible Society, wouldn't you be interested to print this? And so since we already had the New Testament, then the Old Testament was added, and later on they started with the Septuagint and the Vulgate, and so to have to cover the whole range of scholarly editions, and not only for Germany, but also then for the United Bible Societies, and in the end for the whole world.
Nós temos aqui a edição do Novo Testamento grego. O Novo Testamento grego, aqui é a quinta edição. Essa não é a edição de Nestle-Aland, mas é o mesmo texto. É uma edição mais resumida, que é usada muito pelos tradutores da Bíblia no mundo inteiro, pelas Sociedades Bíblicas Unidas. This is the Greek text.
The UBS Greek New Testament. Yeah.
Esse texto é conhecido como o texto grego da UBS do Novo Testamento. Esse texto também foi preparado por Nestle-Aland.
So the main text is the same in both editions. The editions differ in the critical apparatus, what they offer there for the different readers. So the Nestle-Aland is more for research, for high-level scholarship and so on. Or, for example, in Germany at the universities, it's always Nestle-Aland which is used. Yeah. But the same editorial committee, which is responsible for the Nestle-Aland, is also now responsible for this one. And here the apparatus is more prepared for translators and for on a little bit easier to understand level. And this is going to be more developed also for the next edition, which is published in a few years, so that it's they have the same Greek text, but they have two different types of apparatus depending on what you need for your work, for your study, for your research.
Eu vou ajudar vocês que estão em casa e mostrar um pouquinho para entenderem o que ele estava explicando. Todas as Bíblias, os Novos Testamentos, e a Bíblia Hebraica também é assim, ela tem duas partes. Essa parte de cima até a linha é o texto do Novo Testamento. Aqui está o texto. E quando ele mencionou o aparato ou aparato crítico, são essas notas aqui ao final. Então, se há algum manuscrito que tem uma pequena divergência, qualquer divergência, ele é colocado aqui. E é dito em que papiro ou em que texto antigo aquela diferença existe. Então, aqui é o texto. Esse texto é o mesmo para a edição de Nestle-Aland, mas o aparato crítico aqui é mais resumido, porque ele visa os tradutores. Então, essa é a razão disso. Mas é o mesmo texto grego, com essa diferença. E a comissão que prepara é a mesma que prepara as duas edições. Eu acho que aí ficou um pouquinho mais. E essa folhinha, para que serve?
So these are the witnesses. Here you have all the manuscripts which are still extant for the New Testament, and starting with the old papyri. Normally these are small pieces, but they testify the text of the New Testament only a few decades or maybe 1 or 2 centuries after the things happened. And if you compare this to other books from old times, this is the really good testimony. And as you can see here, there's a long list, and this is not everything, but only the more important ones. So if you have this, then you can decode what is written here in the apparatus. And therefore you need this sheet to have it always at hand to use the book. Yeah.
Então, se você quiser estudar grego e hebraico, você vai usar isso aqui no seu dia a dia. Você estuda o texto grego, quer saber se há uma diferença, olha no aparato crítico, e se você no aparato crítico quer entender que papiro é esse, de que época ele é, aquela folhinha que ele estava mostrando vai ajudar você. É uma maneira muito bonita de você entrar e veja quanto estudo há em torno do texto bíblico, para que a gente tenha realmente certeza de que está tendo nas suas mãos a palavra de Deus. Professor, pastor Christoph Rösel, quando a gente estuda um tema na Bíblia, por exemplo, o senhor vai falar sobre o tema da paz aqui no fórum, e possivelmente quando vocês vão ouvir isso, ele já tenha falado sobre esse tema. Como é que a gente estuda um tema como paz dentro do texto bíblico? Qual é um caminho que a gente pode seguir?
I think the challenge is that the different themes have different ways how you can study them in the Bible. So I think it really depends upon the theme. For example, if you make a study about creation, you can start directly at the beginning, and you get an understanding, and you don't have to think long where to start. Just start in Genesis 1, and you have some input about creation and all these questions, and then you go maybe to Psalm 104 or Psalm 8 and so on, and then you have very important texts there. But then if you have more something about Jesus, you start in the New Testament. For example, if you want to cover the whole life of Jesus, you can read the Gospel of Luke, where you have the story of his birth until the ascension. So you have everything in this Gospel. But therefore, I think you need a little bit guidance. You cannot do every theme in the same way. And if you want, I could tell a little bit what I presented at the forum about the because this is now in my mind. Yeah. So it's so if we look at the when you invited me for the forum and we're talking about peace, I very soon came to the book of Psalms. Because the book of Psalms is special in this way that on one hand you have individual texts, but on the other hand, you also have a theme through the whole book. And there is a development in this book. If you look at the first half, you find much more psalms of lament, you find much more conflict, war, peace, and conflict and so on, and no peace. And maybe at the end of each psalm there is a glimpse of the peace, of the full peace. But if you read through the book, there's much more worship and praise and so on coming up. For example, Hallelujah is only coming in Psalm, let's say 104. I don't know exactly at the moment, but I think it was 104, so you realize from there on the Psalms are much more about praising God, and in the end, Psalm 150 is only full of praise, and the whole thing is ending. Everything what breathes shall praise the Lord. Hallelujah.
Hallelujah.
So this is my free translation, but I think you can find it in your translation, Psalm 150, how the book closes. And so you can go step by step through the Psalms and so look at the development through the book. That doesn't work with every book because the books are so different, so therefore I think you need a little bit guidance, understanding, maybe a study Bible, which can help you to find these steps for the theme you are looking for.
É uma maneira de entrar no texto. O tema ajuda a gente a entrar dentro do texto de uma maneira diferente. Ele não vê o que o texto diz, mas você vem com o tema para o texto. E aí o texto orienta o estudioso. Obrigado, é uma maneira bonita de trabalhar. Voltando às publicações teológicas, quais são as grandes questões que a academia, que a universidade hoje tem sobre o texto bíblico?
So if you look at the scholarly editions, I think in some way, we are still following the path which was laid 100 years ago by Eberhard Nestle and Rudolf Kittel. So this is different for the Old Testament and for the New Testament in some way. But we are still trying to further develop this path. And therefore, for the New Testament, the scholars are looking at new manuscripts or comparing the differences between the manuscripts in a new way, presenting a new edition which is called Editio Critica Major, which means that this edition tries to contain everything. And then from this it's condensed to be in the Nestle-Aland and even a little bit more reduced than in the Greek New Testament. One change which the next editions of these two works will bring is a change of the biblical books in the New Testament. Because what we have now is not the sequence which you find in the old manuscripts. So in the old manuscripts, after the Acts of the Apostles, you have the so-called Catholic letters. James, Peter, John, and so on. And then on the letters from Paul. So what we have now in the Nestle-Aland and in the Greek New Testament is a mix. You have the old text, but the sequence is not according to the old manuscripts. It's different in the Hebrew Bible. In the Hebrew, in the Bíblia Hebraica, although the sequence is according to the main old manuscripts. So the Hebrew Old Testament ends with Chronicles and not with Malachi, as it is in our Bibles. So this will be one change. It's not a change of content, but giving you the awareness that there is always a kind of moving the book from the old through the translation to our days today, and having this awareness not only for the Old Testament, but also for the new one.
Essa organização dos livros na sequência que nós temos. O Novo Testamento, agora vai sair uma publicação. O Antigo Testamento, por exemplo, a ordem que nós temos nas Bíblias modernas, e a ordem que nós temos, por exemplo, na Septuaginta? Por que ela é diferente?
The Septuagint is similar. So what when Luther did his translation, he took the number of books from the Hebrew text, but the sequence of books from the Septuagint. So he mixed two things because I think it's a kind of different concept. Because if you read Malachi, I don't know if this is the real English name. This is how we say it in German. So, but the last prophet,
Yeah.
And then you have the immediate bridge to John the Baptist. So it's in at the end of the Old Testament, he is promised that he will come, and at the beginning of the New Testament, it starts with in Matthew. It starts nearly immediately with John the Baptist. So you have a close connection. And the Old Testament therefore gets more oriented to the future, and therefore to the New Testament. But if you look at the Hebrew manuscripts, it's different. But on the other hand, you have to keep in mind that the Hebrew text was written on scrolls, and the individual books were on individual scrolls. So how do you detect an order in scrolls lying beside each other? So there's always some openness in this concept. So only when they started to have it in a codex, so pages, and no longer scrolls, you could really have a fixed sequence. And this is only, I don't know exactly in which century, but long after Jesus lived. So there's always some different aspects to look at. If you ask a scholar, there will always be some reluctance to make a strong statement, because you always know there is some other evidence pointing in another direction, and you have to keep all the evidence in some way together.
Uma dificuldade que há, por exemplo, quando se fala em fazer uma Bíblia em ordem cronológica. É muito difícil fazer o texto bíblico seguir uma ordem cronológica. Existem tentativas, mas não levam a um resultado definitivo. O que vem primeiro, o que vem em segundo lugar e terceiro. Não é isso?
Yes. There is one line. You can go from Genesis to
Revelation.
This is the big one. But in the Old Testament, you have one storyline from Genesis to 2 Kings. So where you have the storyline where you follow the history, but then you have the prophets and where to put them, and you put one part of the book here and one part there and so on. Then you are out. It's easy in the New Testament a little bit, but for the Old Testament, yes, it's a difficult task. Yeah.
Seria difícil para o pastor se cada Bíblia tivesse outra ordem. O pastor, abram a Bíblia no livro tal, capítulo tal. Se não tivesse em ordem, era muito difícil a igreja se colocar toda no mesmo livro. Mas é um desafio que está aí e continua aqui. Muito bem, vamos falar um pouquinho, conta um pouco sobre o trabalho da Sociedade Bíblica Alemã. Como é que é a situação religiosa na Alemanha hoje? As igrejas, se cresce ou não cresce, os não cristãos ou pessoas que se declaram sem fé em Deus nenhum. Qual é a situação religiosa na Alemanha hoje?
How many hours do you have for explaining this difficult question? So as a Bible society, we always say we have three main tasks. This is Bible translation, this is Bible distribution, this is Bible engagement. All what we do is in somehow connected to this, and therefore, if you look at the religious situation, I would say we are on the way to a post-Christian society, or maybe we are already there. So we still have roughly 50% Christians, but we used to have 90%, so 50% is not so many anymore, and this is just church members. and not all of them are practicing, and only few of them are attending services and so on. And so this is, and the number is decreasing, is shrinking, and so therefore this is also a challenge for us on one hand, that just the traditional ways, that for confirmation, for school classes and so on, less Bibles are needed. On the other hand, there is more need of explaining things about the Bible, of promoting knowledge about the Bible. A lot of our culture is influenced through the Bible. If you just go in a museum for medieval arts and see, look at all the paintings, if you have no idea about the Bible, you don't understand the subjects, what is painted there. And so people need our literature, and there's a lot of cultural influence still from Bible and Christianity, but things are changing. And this is always a challenge, also for us as a Bible society, and we try to cope with this challenge, and thinking about our strategy and how can we reach out to people and how can we use our limited resources in the best and most effective way. This is what we are trying to do, and always thinking about translation, distribution, engagement. These are our guidelines. Our mission is to bring the Bible to everyone, and we try to do this as best as possible.
É o grande desafio. It's a big challenge. Yeah. And deixa eu voltar aqui para outras duas obras. Essa aqui é a Septuaginta, de Rals and Hanhart, a segunda edição. Fala um pouquinho sobre essa obra, a Septuaginta. O que é isso?
Yeah. So there is there's another project in Germany for the Septuagint, which started 100 years ago. To make a critical edition of the Septuagint. But the list of manuscripts is also very long, and it's complicated because the Septuagint is a translation in most of the books. It's a translation from Hebrew to Greek, and sometimes it's difficult to discern, is this only something the translator did, where he translated a little bit more freely, or did he had another original before him? Did he had another Hebrew text which he translated, which is no longer extant? And so this is the challenge for the Septuagint. And then in the 1930s, the Bible Society asked Mr. Ralphs, who was at this time the head of this project, to make a short edition. And this is the result. And the good thing is, this is the only complete critical edition of the Septuagint because the other project is still running. And they are not completing in the next 10 years. And after some years ago, Mr. Hanhart, who was at this time the head of the project, did some revision. So this is not such full, complete, not an editio major. It's an editio minor, which is only focusing on the main knowledge you need. But for most people, this is enough. And the importance of the Septuagint is that the early Christians used the Greek Bible.
Yeah.
So they used the Septuagint. And so sometimes if you compare when the New Testament quotes the Old Testament, and you don't find the exact wording in the Old Testament, this is because they used the Septuagint, which translated it maybe in a little bit different way. And so therefore for the Old Testament, we not only need the Hebrew Bible, we also need the Septuagint. And some of the books in here are used by different churches also as part of their Old Testament. For example, the book of the Maccabees, or Tobias, and so on. So, and these books are only, we only have the Greek version of them. Some of them were originally written in Hebrew, but we only have the Greek version. And so therefore for some churches, for example, the Roman Catholic Church, these books are part of their Old Testament. And also Luther also translated them into German, and so many Bibles have some either somewhere in the Old Testament or as a separate part between the Old and the New Testament. And therefore, you need the Septuagint.
Veja como é importante essa ponte entre o Antigo e o Novo Testamento que a Septuaginta faz. E vamos, já que comentamos as outras obras, vamos falar um pouquinho da Vulgata e da sua importância. Antes até você mencionou a questão dos livros da Bíblia. Quando Lutero traduziu, ele usou o número do Antigo Testamento, mas a ordem da Vulgata. Como é que isso funciona na prática?
As far as I know, it's the same as in the Septuagint, but I have to confess I don't know it exactly. My Latin is limited, very limited. I learned a little bit Latin at school, but most of them is gone. But the story behind this edition is similar to the Septuagint. There's another project, also in Germany, for the old Latin of the Vulgate, and the main editor or the head of this project made this edition. And so this is also a concise edition of the Vulgate. And if you look at the old times, Hebrew, Greek, and Latin, these were the most important languages, which were spoken for the church and in the tradition, and which were used for the Bible. And when Luther translated the New Testament, he used the edition of Erasmus. And this Erasmus was a bilingual edition. It was Greek and Latin. So this was common at this time, to have these languages together. And so if you really want to dive deep, so you need also the Vulgate. As you can see from my experience and from my knowledge, Latin is maybe no longer so common as it was 20, 30, 40 years ago for scholars. Yeah.
Aqui a gente tem a passagem de 3 culturas, a cultura hebraica, para a cultura grega e para a cultura romana. Essa passagem, ela influencia de alguma maneira a compreensão do texto?
Every transition and translation influences. And so the Greek kind of thinking is influenced from the philosophical, the old philosophers from Greece. If you look at Exodus 3, where God tells his name to Moses, in Hebrew he says, Ehyeh asher ehyeh. I am whom I am, I will be whom I will be, or whatever how you translate it. In Greek it says, ego eimi hoon. I am the being one, whatever. So this is much more philosophical. But this was for the audience. It was audience and so on. They tried to understand, to make the best out of it for the audience. And this is what every translator does. And so this is something we have in Greek, and the interesting thing for the Bible is that you have some of the original texts in Hebrew, then you have the Greek translation, but then you have other original texts in Greek, and so you have really a mixture of this culture, and I think this encourages us also to translate the Bible into other languages, into all languages of the world, because it's already included in the Bible, that the translation is necessary, and that between the Old and the New Testament there was a shift of culture and a shift of languages, and so we need translation from the start of our faith.
A tradução é uma obra inacabada, inclusive porque as línguas vão mudando.
Yes, yeah. The Luther Bible, during the last 150 years, every 20 to 30 years was revised. So the last revision was only completed in 2016. It always tries to keep the translation in some way alive. But today you cannot deny that the Luther Bible is a translation from the 16th century. Even if it's revised, it's no longer the language we have today. So yes, translation is always an unfinished task and needs to be reworked and added with new translations. Yeah.
É bom saber isso da tradução de Lutero, porque em português a grande tradução é a tradução de Almeida. O próprio Almeida já fez revisões da sua tradução. E a Sociedade Bíblica ainda publica aqui no Brasil 3 versões de Almeida, a revista corrigida, a revista atualizada e a nova Almeida atualizada. Lembram a Almeida, mas são sempre atualizações da língua, não da Bíblia. A Bíblia é a mesma, mas atualizações. Mostra que esse problema das revisões é um problema praticamente da igreja em todo o mundo. Dr. Christoph, muito obrigado pela sua entrevista, pela sua conversa tão amistosa aqui conosco, pela sua presença aqui no Brasil. Você quer dar uma palavra para os nossos ouvintes, uma palavra de encorajamento à leitura da Bíblia? Por favor, faça isso.
Yeah. It's a pleasure to be with you, and it was a pleasure to talk with you here. Thank you. Yeah.
Muito obrigado a vocês que nos acompanharam nessa live tão interessante, tiveram essa aula de Bíblia, de originais da Bíblia, de tradução da Bíblia, edições acadêmicas e puderam entrar nesse mundo tão especializado. Que Deus abençoe vocês todos.